work through this, kind of give you an overview of what we've got laid out for you as far as labor and facilities and some of those kinds of things and keys to success. So one thing to keep in mind is a beef operation is not a beef operation. It's not a beef operation. There are differences among them depending on the type of enterprise or operation that they have. Some of the more common ones that we'll find in Wisconsin would be the cow-calf operations. They're the most common. But then there's also finishing out cattle, backgrounding and stockers, and calf raisers are also a part of the beef production system as well. It's important to keep in mind that some of these beef farms will have more than one of these type of specific enterprises. There are some similarities, as you'll see, but there are also differences. The other thing to keep in mind is they come in all different sizes in Wisconsin. Some are just a few head, some are up to several thousand head. The smaller ones are not going to be enough to be a primary income source for most folks. They'd be more of a supplemental type of income to be included with other enterprises on the farm or off the farm jobs or something like that. So the first enterprise we'll discuss is the cow-calf operation. And when we think about that one, the cows are at the farm all year long. And ideally, the cows live there for a long time, 6 or more years. They don't always make it that long, but that's kind of the goal. In this situation, what they're looking to do to make their money specifically from a cow-calf enterprise is that they sell the calves after they're weaned from the cows. And so they're going to be there. The cows will be there all year round. The calves will be there part of the year. And a primary feed source for cow-calf operations would be forage-based, whether it's pasture or harvested forages during the wintertime with minimal supplementation.
So beef production is a business, and that entails production record keeping and farm accounting, and also making some marketing decisions. Marketing involves buying and selling cattle either through the auction market or by private treaty. Feed is the biggest expense on these farms. Feed mills and other consultants are available to help with feed ration formulation, which is done based on lab samples of the feeds that are going to be fed. So the forages are sampled and measured, and then that's all used to help build a balanced ration. Now, some beef operators will balance their own rations as well, and they don't use the mill as much. Animals should be inspected daily for symptoms of ill health or not keeping up with the rest of the herd, and to ensure that the animals always have access to proper feed and water. Now, producers often do their own, quote, sick animal work, moving and restraining individual animals for treatment. Large animal veterinarians are available that can help with preventative and treatment plans and will diagnose and treat animals, but they cannot provide hands-on care or treatment unless that producer has the animal restrained. There is currently a shortage of large animal vets in Wisconsin, so veterinary help is not always readily available, but it is more available to those producers who first establish a veterinary relationship and have an adequate handling facility. Producers, cow-calf producers especially, also have to watch for predators because these animals are often housed outside or on pastures. So producers have to keep an eye out for coyotes and wolves and feral dogs and skunks and raccoons because that could lead to rabies exposure. And even eagles can be a problem with newborn calves. Labor needs, the daily routine labor needs, can be lower during some times of the year. For instance, in summer with cattle on pasture, labor mostly includes daily visual observation of the herd to ensure they're healthy and to make sure they have the right feed and water in front of them. And then also checking fences and electrical fencers to make sure the cattle are staying where they're supposed to be. And also the producer needs to keep an eye on that pasture, examine the grass for its height and its availability, and also scouting for weeds or the need to potentially renovate that pasture in the future. In the winter, cattle are often housed up closer to buildings or by windbreaks to provide shelter and to keep them dry and clean. Winter daily labor increases to include more chores, with the caretaker providing feed and making sure water is provided, not frozen, along with bedding and the removal of soiled bedding or manure. Cattle, again, I keep saying this, they have to have access to feed, mineral, salt, water. And while we see this picture here in Wisconsin, very typically as you drive down the road, you're going to see cattle eating this way. This is not an example of a good feeding practice. Later on, you're going to see pictures of bale feeders or rings, which are used to limit the hay loss. There are times of the year that require more labor in a cow-calf operation. Examples of labor-intensive times include herd management events and times of loading cattle out or moving them to pasture or to market. Greater labor hours are required during calving season for calving checks, providing obstetrical care, and then processing newborn calves. And then weaning time involves increased labor needs. Now, when we mention shoot events, and we're going to probably say this quite a bit as we go through this presentation, we're typically talking about whole herd or group events generally done to perform some type of health management. Cattle see these shoot events as stressful. Going through the chute often includes a shot or something mildly painful. It's a lot like how we as humans dread the routine dentist or the medical checkups or our annual flu shots. It's not something we look forward to doing. And the cattle can be a little bit timid about wanting to go through the chute and having that done. Typically, the whole herd is vaccinated and dewormed once or twice a year. Now, the goal for each cow in a cow-calf herd is for that cow to have a calf every year. So cattle are generally bred once a year, although some operations will split their herds into 2 breeding seasons because they want their herd to calve in the spring and then another group to calve in the fall. Some producers use bulls for breeding, which can entail needing a separate pen to house bulls once the cattle are pregnant or no longer mating. Breeding with a bull does not involve bringing the cattle through a chute. There would just be a trip for the cows through the chute for their pregnancy diagnosis. If, however, the producer is not using bulls, but rather he is using artificial insemination or possibly estrus synchronization and artificial insemination, that can entail 2 to 4 times through the chute, with one more trip at the end to check that animal for pregnancy. During the calving season, late gestation animals are often moved to areas or pens that are closer to the handling facility. And then they are checked several times a day for signs of labor and for the need for obstetrical assistance. Calving cows are often moved into individual maternity pens to better enable their care and the caring of the newborn calf. Sometimes these calves need help with nursing. Weaning itself is very stressful for both the mama and the calf. Calves at this point are like preschool kids. Producers need to get them ready to, quote, go to school, how to eat and drink on their own, how to eat strange foods like pellets or baled hay, even just getting used to having a human handler around them more often. Cows and calves are often separated from each other by using that chute, and the calves may receive vaccinations and deworming at this time as they go through the chute. So basic equipment that's needed for cow-calf operations includes feeders, bunks, troughs, and watering tubs or watering systems, and healthcare equipment. Proper handling equipment is needed not only for the safety of the animal, but for the safety of the human handler. Some equipment is an absolute need, including fencing, cattle panels, or some sort of gating to keep cattle off of the neighbor's property or out of the family garden. Fencing will have to be improved or maintained from year to year due to unforeseen weather events or because the deer or other animals have broken the fence. Gates and fencing is used to guide cattle into the chute. Bill will be talking more about handling facilities and their design and placement so that they can effectively function in the area where they are placed. Gates themselves can be a weapon that hurts both people and animals. Gates must swing freely. Oftentimes they're heavy, and it's just too slow and cumbersome to be dragging them into place. But free to swing means it can be kicked or swung at you. Lighter weight gates may not hold the animal. They bend or they bust too fast. We have seen the use of more PVC or polyplastic gates, which are actually pretty strong, but they're very lightweight and they can really whip like a whip. Also, they can abrase your skin as your hands glide over their surface. Latches must quickly and securely latch to hold the gate closed. Chaining gates closed too long, it takes too long. It just takes too long to fiddle with a chain, to chain that thing shut, and it takes too long to unchain them to get them opened. It's better to have a quick release latch. So gates and latches require some maintenance and repair if broken, and replacement on more of a routine basis than what they sometimes are. Cattle perform best when they're clean and dry. Buildings and other confinement options are great for protecting cattle from the elements, but they're not absolutely necessary, as beef cattle are hardy and they can withstand abnormal temperatures up to a point, but they have to stay dry and they need to be out of the wind. Windbreaks and other structures allow cattle to get in and stay dry from a storm. Now, if the producer is housing these animals outside on the pasture or in dry lots, using windbreaks, they also have to be watching about where these cattle are congregating, up against the windbreak, around the waterer, around the feeders. You can end up with a lot of mud and manure buildup in these areas, which can get slippery in the winter and also can just cause a lot of the animals to get too dirty and too wet. When you're feeding animals outside, it's important to have some type of pad or cleaning hard surface for the cattle to stand on that can be cleaned in order to minimize that buildup of mud manure where we can get the buildup of other pests or disease-causing agents.
So then we can discuss some other pieces of equipment here. Tractors and or skid loaders are going to be very commonly needed on beef operations, moving hay bales around, doing repairs on fence, different things like that. Tractors in particular for livestock operations a lot of them will tend to have a loader on them as well. Manure spreader, we've got question marks beside some of these because not all beef operations necessarily need a manure spreader. Some of the smaller ones, if they're primarily having the cattle out wintering on pastures and moving around, they may not need to spread manure or have very little, and they could hire it done cheaper than actually owning a piece of equipment themselves. Then we could say the same thing with haymaking equipment, depending on the size of the operation. They may find it to be less expensive to hire the haymaking done if they've got some hay fields on their property, or they buy their hay and have more acres that they can graze the animals with, maybe have a few more animals. That's going to be more of a case-by-case situation of what seems to be the most economically practical to do. UTVs and ATVs are very handy. We see them on a lot of farms. They make a lot of chores easier for a lot of those daily tasks, going to check animals, taking mineral supplements or different things like that out to where the animals are, helping move waters if they're rotational grazing, which is a good management practice to include. Pickup trucks themselves, of course, very common, and probably most will have a pickup truck, but the bigger question is, does every beef farm need a livestock trailer? And the answer to that is not necessarily. Some may, if they're moving animals around the lot and have a lot of animals. Other ones, even if they've got a lot of animals, if they're not moving them around a lot because the animals can walk pretty much everywhere they need to do, they may find it less expensive to pay somebody that's a commercial hauler that does this for a living to haul a few times that they need them hauled, rather than to own some of that equipment themselves. So that's something that, they have to evaluate what's going to be the most economically feasible for them and labor-wise too. Here we've got an example of a pasture, and out in this pasture area, we've got a corral down in the corner. As Sandy was mentioned, we need to be able to catch the animals, and sometimes if our main facility and handling equipment is back at the farm for some of our bigger chores, but we've got them out on some pastures farther out, it's a good idea to have some sort of a setup in the corner or a portable facility, which we'll show more about later, to be able to catch them if they need to be caught when they're out farther away from the primary facilities. You've also got some hay or feed storage. I should not just hay, but feed storage and feeding needs. Bale feeders, we mentioned those a little earlier. We may need some feed bunks. We'll show some pictures of those in a little bit here to deliver the feed to minimize waste. Sandy talked about that picture of the pile of hay, and the cattle are eating about half and laying on the other half. And if we don't manage that well, our feed costs go up because we need more feed to get through the winter because they're wasting a bunch of it. And same with storage. As you can see in the right-hand picture here, there's a lot of rotten hay in that. That's not a good thing. So on the left-hand side, we've got one example of hay storage with a tarp, stacking the bales in a pyramid and putting the tarp over, so that would be something they would need and or be able to have to do, or have somebody else help with that. So again, we want to minimize that feed waste because this feed's the biggest cost, and if we're not efficient with it, that just makes things worse. Here's another example. Here's our fine tractor with the loader on it, and then an example of a hay shed. These are getting fairly common because with the pyramid stack with the tarp over it in the previous picture, you got to get off the tractor or out of the skid loader and loosen the ropes and get your hay out and then tighten it back down so the wind doesn't rip it all to pieces on you. Where a shed, you stack it inside of there and they can go in and out of there, and they don't got to get in and out of the equipment quite so frequently to get the feed and be able to take it out to the animals. And as you can see here, beef operations, some of this equipment doesn't have to be new and fancy. It just has to really be functional. And this is a good example of good functional equipment that's got some age on it, but it's been taken care of. And here's an example of a better way to feed the hay. There's more ways than this, different styles of feeders and putting it in bunks and different things like that. And a lot of that's kind of matching what works best for the farm. So the hay is placed in that ring, and the animals can then go up and eat, and it keeps the hay inside of the ring, so there's less waste for that hay. And then the back right side there, it's actually a shed that you don't see, that they've got that hay stacked under right next to the pen where those cattle are at. And then here's one example of a bunk. Bunks can be portable. They can be, some bunks you can move around. They're made out of steel frame with a kind of a pan or a tub in them that you put the feed in. Here's an example of a permanent. Matching what works best to the farm is kind of what needs to be done there. So this one was made where they can lay that. The cattle will be on the left side of that highway guardrail divider there. There's a spot down below there, the gap. You can see where they put their heads through. And then the feed is delivered right along there. And they can come up and eat it. And it helps where they're not stepping in the feed and trampling all over it and wasting. And then once in a while, they can come through there and push it back up for them. So this is one example of a retrofitted situation that was made with some planking and guardrails to provide an area to feed the cattle.
So before we move on to our next type of operation, has anybody got a question? Or for sure you can chat or type your questions into the chat as you go along. And I'm not watching the chat, so Michelle can interrupt if there is a burning question that you have about something we just said. So the next type of operation we're discussing is known as a stocker or a backgrounder. These two terms describe the same size of animal. Generally, this is the post-weaned 5 to 6 month old 400-pound calf that is raised on grass or on a dry lot until it's about 850 pounds. These calves, we can think of them as middle school kids. They're fed a forage-based diet. The stockers are raised on pasture where the forage is fresh grass that the calves harvest themselves. They're known as stockers because we stock the pasture with them. We pay attention to the stocking rate so that we don't overstock that pasture because we need enough actively growing grass to keep those calves growing and gaining weight every day. Stocker operations operate from spring through fall, not in the winter in Wisconsin. Some stocker operations will accumulate these stocker calves on a dry lot before grass turnout. So for a little bit, they're a backgrounder and then they become a stocker. Now the upper picture shows the producer moving calves to the next pasture. He's moving them on foot, but this is where a gator or a UTV can be used. And you can see he's walking on in front of them. The cattle learn that when the human shows up, the food gets a whole lot better. Generally, he's either bringing food or he's putting them to green grass. And the animals can actually almost be trained to follow him to the next place. Now, when the calves are raised on a dry lot or in a grow yard, they're fed ensiled forage, which could be haylage or corn silage. They're not grazing fresh grass. These operations can operate year-round. This lower picture shows how these cattle are eating at a bunk, feed that's been brought to them. So much like the cow-calf daily chores, the stocker chores in the summers consist of daily checking animals for health and well-being, and then there's pasture and fence maintenance, and also managing for predators again. The backgrounders have daily feeding and rebedding and cleaning tasks or chores. Sometimes it's weekly rebedding or cleaning. Everything's done kind of on a schedule as needed. The backgrounder is also going to have fence repair or repairs to the pen, also bunk and waterer cleaning and maintenance. Producers either stock or background their own calves that they've raised from their cow-calf herd, or they purchase groups of calves to then feed out until they're up to 800 and so pounds. Either way, these calves are received or processed at the start of the growing season to start them as a uniform group. They get their identifications applied if they don't already have them, and they are often given a baseline set of vaccinations. They're then also acclimated to the bunks, to the waterers, and to the handlers. Now, purchased calves are usually commingled from multiple sources. So much like those first few weeks of school or daycare, the kids pass germs around and sickness. So caretakers have to carefully watch newly commingled cattle for symptoms and to be prepared to sort out those who need treatment. At the end of the growing season, as the cattle approach 800 pounds, this is when they're going to be sorted back out into uniform groups for marketing. Generally, we don't want to market one or two calves at a group. You want a bigger number, 4 to 6 or more. The next order buyer, the next person buying these cattle for their finishing lots, they want to receive a uniform and multiple calves in that group to help to fill their finishing lots.
All right, so, and from a stocker and backgrounder, there's a fair amount of overlap, and similarity between the facilities and equipment that's needed. Again, here's a nice example of a bunk and a bunch more of those lighter weight calves. Those calves in that picture probably are in that 600-ish pound range at the time that the picture was taken. And so we won't necessarily go through that, but we'll kind of move into the next type of beef operation. That would be the feedlot. And so what they're doing is finishing them out, fattening them up to the point where they're ready to harvest and become good steaks and roasts and things like that that we like to eat. And so there's a fair amount of flexibility in beef operations. Sometimes they'll start with 400 pounders. especially if they're looking at beef dairy cross animals or Holsteins and even straight beef animals. But and then, or they might buy them when they weigh 800, 900 pounds and then finish them out to finishing. Finish weight, 1,200 pounds is probably on the small end. And right now in the industry, some of the finished cattle that are being sold are 1,650 plus pounds. They're feeding them big right now because cattle numbers across the country are kind of low. Most of the time, most feedlot operations that do this specifically are a year-round deal. Some of the cow-calf people that maybe want to finish out their own, they only finish out their own. And so this part of the operation is only for part of the year. In most cases, we're looking at dry lot housing and maybe they've got some sheds, a three-sided shed. There's also situations where the cattle are under a roof all the time in a finishing operation. It kind of varies from farm to farm and what works best and what they're looking to do. Now, where the earlier examples of raising beef cattle we talked about were primarily forages, whether it's dry hay or some haylage or something like that. When we're talking about finishing, grain finishing animals, they're going to be fed on a high grain, higher energy ration. Just to back up a little bit, folks that are interested in the grass finish type of an operation, that's basically doing the stocker thing where they're out on the pasture and or eating harvested hay, dry hay or haylage all year round. But this example I'm talking about is grain finished, which is the majority of the meat that we're going to find and eat at the grocery stores or buy from a farmer probably. So some of the things that are routine, again, as mentioned with the other ones, all of these have some record keeping paperwork kinds of things. Marketing, they may be doing some legwork, looking at forward contracts or some kind of risk management as part of their operation. And as Sandy mentioned earlier, some farmers are comfortable and very good at doing rations. They don't have to. They can work with somebody, a nutritionist that does this for a living, to help them do that if they're not comfortable with that. Buying cattle is another one of those things. Some folks like to do that. I think there's buying cattle if they're going to the sale barn, picking them up, or maybe they buy them direct from farms. But I think for a lot of folks, there's a little bit of a social aspect, which is good for mental health, I think, in a lot of cases. Going to the sale barn, catching up on the local gossip and that kind of thing, they do that. Other ones don't necessarily care to do that. They'll work with an order buyer to try to find a reputable one, and they know what kind of animals they're looking for, and they can kind of collect them up, get them put together, bought for them. Another thing in daily is every day we got to go out and walk through there, watch them, see how they're doing, see if anybody's not doing well. If they're not doing well, do we need to treat them or do we just need to watch them and see if they come out of it themselves if they were just having a bad day? That's an important part of it. Feeding, both in the backgrounding and feedlot finishing, managing that bunk and delivering that feed and making sure that matching up that feed delivery with very close to what they're eating every day is a huge part of a successful, profitable beef operation. It can't be understated that is a big, important thing. If the bunk is empty too long, we can get digestive upsets. Cattle are very much creatures of habit, and they like being fed the same time or very close to the same time every day. If they're going hungry too long, they're kind of like us. They'll get hangry, and when the food is there, they'll tend to overeat, and that's when we can start getting some digestive disorders. Cleaning pens and bedding is very important. We need to keep the cattle clean. Clean hair coat and dry is important to minimize weather stress and things like that. And of course, if we've got different facilities around the farm with livestock around them, things wear out. We talked about the importance of making sure gates work earlier. Cleaning the waters, making sure things work like they're supposed to so that everything works well and it's a good habitat environment for those animals to be raised in. Some of the higher labor times in feedlot, as we mentioned, that shoot word comes up again.
Yeah.
And this, in most cases, the shoot work and a lot of this work is on the first 30 to 45 days when a new batch of calves come in. So they'll bring in a new group of calves and try to get them settled down and eating and drinking and relatively happy. And then they'll generally go through, everybody will go through that chute again, get some vaccination boosters and potentially some implants to get an ear tag so we can know who's, if we got a whole pen of all black cattle, and we're watching to see who's not feeling well, it helps a lot to have a nice ear tag in there where we can read a number and know exactly which of those all black cattle it is, or all red ones, whichever it happens to be. There is some time taken where you have to acclimate the cattle to the bunks, the waters, the handlers, folks that are really good at this. They'll get the group in there and they'll just quietly go in the pen and walk them on them a little bit so they become familiar with it and keep everybody kind of calm. And then over time, may do some sorting at different times, but marketing time, depending on how they're selling their animals, if they're selling them by semi-lot loads or if they're selling the smaller group as they're ready to go. They'll be going in there and sorting those animals, the ones that are ready to get harvested to become steaks and roasts off in the groups. Sometimes when they'll bring in bigger groups of young calves, they'll also sort them into more uniform groups at that time as well. And then loading and hauling, they definitely will need a way to load the animals out. They may or may not, just like with the cow calf, they may or may not need to have a trailer themselves. They may hire that done. Some farmers have semis with cattle trailers. Some have pickup trucks with cattle trailers. And I know some that have a fair amount of cattle and they don't have trailers. They have it done hauled in by pay somebody else, a custom hauler, to do it. And then when animals are in confined housing, there's accumulation of manure and bedding that does need to be hauled out and spread on their crop acres or the neighbors' crop acres if they got an agreement with them to be used as fertilizer. And so that would be another time when there's a lot more labor going on than maybe when those things aren't happening. And that could be a couple times a year or quarterly or however they kind of set it up and how their facilities are laid out. As far as equipment goes, a lot of times it's dry lots, 3-sided sheds to give them some shelter from the weather, although they do have the option to go outside if the weather's nice and the cattle kind of decide where it's most comfortable for them. There are some total confinement sheds. We've got a couple pictures of those coming up. Retired dairy loafing sheds and old heifer sheds, they can work really well transition for beef housing. And then we would need some feed storage, and that may be silage bags or bunkers, grain bins for some grain storage, or if it's high moisture grain, that would be in silage bags and bunkers as well. Very similar to what would be used for dairy cattle feed. And then equipment. In some cases, we might see a TMR mixer. So the picture on the slide that you see, that's a quite large one. They do come in smaller versions for smaller operations where the feed is put into that, mixed up. We'll call it, for lack of a better word, if you're not real familiar with cattle feed, kind of like a casserole, and then it's delivered to the animals. We do want to see that, the feed will be placed in the bunk. There's also what's called a self feeder, and we've got a picture of that to kind of talk about a little bit. Handling facilities, we are going to need a chute. We're going to need some holding area pens and different things to be able to get the animals guided into the chute and where they would go afterwards. Tractors and skid loaders, very common on feedlot operations. Manure hauling, again, that some farms will have it, probably more feedlots will have manure spreaders, or most of them would. A few may not. One of the housing methods they have is called slat floor barn. So there's slats in the floor, the cattle are on that. The manure in the urine goes down into a pit underneath it. That gets hauled out once or twice a year, and a lot of times those guys will hire a custom manure applicator to come pump that out. So they may not have much for manure hauling equipment. And then the truck is probably pretty common, but the trailer, again, as I mentioned, they may or may not need that depending on their situation. So here's our TMR mixer again. And again, that one's a big one. And here you can also see we've got some dirt lots, and they're going by placing the feed in the bunk where the animals can then come up and eat. And in our next picture up in the upper left is that's a covered kind of one example of a more modern type of a cattle finishing shed where they've got the pens under a roof to help keep the rain and some of those things out of there and provide some shade. And in the lower right picture, what we've got there is a retrofitted heifer shed from a dairy farm, and that red box there is actually a self feeder. So a mixture of dry, it has to be dry feed that goes into self feeders because if it freezes, it won't flow out of them. And they keep that full, and it meters down into a little trough, and the cattle go up there any time of the day they want and eat some of it. Usually it's a corn and pellet type of a mixture.
So it is also possible to raise calves or raise bottle calves as a beef enterprise, if you will. This term bottle calf or wet calf, that refers to calves that are still on milk or milk replacer. It's that pre-weaned animal. And in beef production, that involves raising dairy breeds or beef on dairy crossbred calves and marketing them at once they're weaned at 400 to 700 pounds as weaned feeder calves. So this type of operation can be seasonal or year round, depending on what the operator wants to do. But this one has got really high labor commitments. It is a daily challenge of feeding and caring for these individual calves. Usually they're in individual hutches, or sometimes you've got robotic feeders going on where calves are in pens, but it is making sure calves are fed twice or three times a day. And then a lot of animal care, nursing skills, veterinary skill comes into play because these calves are very vulnerable to more illness challenges, if you will. So Bill and I are taking a huge assumption that you guys talked about dairy calf chores in your dairy session. So raising these calves is pretty much the same as how the dairies are doing it with their dairy heifers. So beef cattle are not pets. They generally do not come to you when called, although I do know some small farms where they do come when they're called. But generally they don't. So handling facilities are a must because we need those facilities to enable the handler to sort individual animals or groups from the herd. For example, to load them into that trailer for transport to a new pasture or to market, or from the herd into a calving area or an individual calving pen. A proper handling facility is more than just that head catch or that squeeze chute. It's more than a lasso thrown to tie the animal to a tree. We don't want to do that. There needs to be a thoughtful design for how to guide that whole group down into a single file that allows for then the catching and sorting of a single animal. Now, well-trained dogs and horses can be very useful for herding up and sorting or cutting individual animals or groups, and UTVs and gators could also be used for that. But poorly trained herding animals and poorly driven vehicles can make herding tasks much more stressful than they need to be. Producers also need a sense of stockmanship. This is the understanding of how cattle see, hear, think, learn, and respond. Stockmanship makes or breaks the facility. The facility cannot function without stockmanship. Bill and I have both seen what at first appears to be a very poor makeshift facility held together with twine and duct tape that cattle actually calmly use and easily flow through because the handler has excellent stockmanship skills. On the flip side, we've also seen very expensive, no expense spared equipment set in concrete that cattle will not flow through. They'll balk or they'll refuse to enter or move forward. And trying to use such a facility results in a stress-filled event, all because the producer did not use stockmanship when designing it.
So we'll kind of spend a little time showing some of this handling equipment because it is very important. What we've got in this photograph are a couple examples of calving pens. You don't necessarily need calving pens, but they can be very helpful. Rather than try to get the cow to go all the way through into the squeeze chute, what we've got here is a small pen we can put the cow in, or the cow and the calf if they've already calved, if she's already calved. It does have a head catch and a way to kind of get the cow over. One of the challenges sometimes mama cow's having a bad day, or if it's the first time a heifer has calved, she doesn't really know what's going on yet. I mean, it's kind of some of that is learned as they go. Sometimes they don't let the calf nurse. Sometimes the calf has got some problems and not it's had a little bit of a difficult delivery, or it was out in some very unhospitable weather and it's pretty weak and can't nurse because it's weak. Having something like this can be very nice somewhere close by where the cows are calving, so you don't have to get them to move too far. Get them in there, get the cow caught, help the calf nurse, do any kind of physical exams or anything. It can make for a less stressful calving situation for both the animals and the people, and safer as well. Here's a line drawing of a handling facility. I think you can see my arrow on here. Um, so where I'm circling now is the holding area. This half circle up at the top is what we call a tub. Tubs are nice. They'll also show you a bud box. One of the big differences between tubs and bud boxes is the people working the animals with the tub don't need quite the fine level of cattle handling experience and good stockmanship as you would with the bud box. Either one of them can work. There's probably some added safety benefits with the tub too, because this gate that's kind of showing swinging swings all the way around, and all along this half circle tub there are stops and there's a brake on it, so you can push it so far and then goes past the stop, and it can only come back so far, and once you get it into the half circle. Then we've got a single file alley and our squeeze chute here with the blue at the front. We've got some slide gates here and backstops, and we've got in this example, I think we got a better picture later, a palpation cage so the veterinarian or the farmer can. Basically, a lot of the work happens either on the head of the animal or on the other end of the animal, and you got to be able to try to access both of those areas as safe as possible. So now we've got one that's got a cut gate there, and we can put a load out alley to fill up the trailer, or we can ask them to go through the squeeze chute and load into the trailer too. All depends on the situation. So time needs to be spent laying these facilities out and fitting them in. There are some very good reputable dealers in Wisconsin that can help with that, and I do a little bit of that myself, helping producers from time to time. I don't do as much as the dealers do, but I can provide another set of eyes and a little help once in a while too. This is an example of the bud box. The concept of this is that cattle like to go back from where they came from. So we would bring them in from the bottom. They would go up into this area with all the numbers and boxes and the red splotch. This gate would be closed with a easy to close latch. The cows come up to the end of this, they turn around and they come back, and generally most beef cows aren't going to hang around and want you to scratch their ears. They're typically not necessarily overly wild, but they generally want to move away from you. And so they come down here and they'll see either this side open or that side open, and they'll think, hey, here's a way I can get away. And they'll go down through there to kind of get away from you. Now, we don't want them so hostile that they come flying in there and tear things up, but that they don't stand there until you got to poke them with a stick to get them to move either. And that ties back to this whole stockmanship and how do we have our cattle acclimated. But taking this one step farther, we can put either the bud box or a tub into a fair amount of existing barns. Depending on the layout of the barn and depending on the hayloft or the roof, we've seen a number of them where they've been able to put some beams across the shortway and got rid of some of the posts that are in there, and then set up here's some holding areas here. Here's our tub from like the previous page. or slide, and then they can come down through here, get worked on, and as they come out, this one's even set up where we can swing gates so they can either go straight out or we can funnel them off to the side or off to this side if we need to sort. Most dairy barns are size that this will fit in them. Doesn't have to be in there, but it is an option. And the other thing is a lot of these old dairy barns do not have very good ventilation. So we're not having anything in there real long, so we can get away with that. Where if we had the animals housed in there all the time, we might really need to look carefully at improving ventilation. Now, here's a better picture. If we set one up outside, um, and this kind of over to the right, where you don't see it, is the actual squeeze chute. Where you can see the table over here and the people with all the supplies for whatever they're doing to the animals, vaccinating them. Here's our tub. And here we've got holding pens. And so we'll bring in, and it looks like they've got the cows sorted off from the calves and they're working the cows through right now. But so we've got multiple holding areas, and this is a pretty big operation here. They don't always have to be this big. We can size these holding areas and things to the size of the operation at the farm. So it may not necessarily need to be this big, but they're working the cows across and out, and then they might be going back out to the pasture somewhere or whatever. And then when they get done with that, they maybe then take the calves through and then they'll end up going somewhere else. Or they're just doing some vaccinations and everybody goes back out. We don't know, but you can see here, this back part with the tub and the alley and the holding areas that they can bring them in is very important to making the chute and everything else function well. If we get injured or have a hard time getting animals into the chute or don't have a chute, a lot of times management things don't happen. And here's a smaller version of a handling facility with some holding pens, and then we can work them around. Got gates in this kind of center thing. They don't have to be this fancy, but they're not all real big either. We match them to the size of the operation. And then we even have some portable or partial portable versions of these. So here's one example where we've got a tub and a shorter loading alley and a squeeze chute that we can get up in the air, hook onto a tractor or a big enough truck to handle it, and pull it out to wherever we need to be. And here it is. It's a version, the same thing, set up on the ground for them. And then behind us, where we don't see, is that other holding area pens that we saw in the previous pictures of, set up to get the animals in there and then to work them through into the tub and down through the chute and the head gate. And all these things have to work together for safety and efficiency and achieving what we want to do. So here's kind of a side version of a squeeze chute. And we've got the operator here applying probably a parasite control product. This gate to her right, this is what I was talking about, the palpation cage before. So there's a gate in there that keeps the next cow in line from helping you do whatever you need to do to the back of this cow in the chute. And then the veterinarian or the people can open that up and do whatever they need to do, whether it's artificial insemination or pregnancy checking or breeding soundness exam on the bull. A lot of those different things, you would need access to the rear of the animal or castrating the bull calves. Those are nice to have that ability to do that. If you got to climb over too many gates, you get tired and hurt and all those kinds of things. So important feature. Here's another interesting example. So the previous squeeze chute was manually operated, and there were levers and bars and things that the operator had to pull to squeeze the animal or let them go. Here's an example of a hydraulic operated squeeze chute. And so folks that maybe have some more limited mobility issues or strength disabilities, something like this makes it where they could operate and catch the animals and things like that without as much physical requirements. And this one, the other nice thing about this, more squeeze chutes, and we'll see some more examples of this. They also, in the modern ones, typically will have some mechanism to, once the animal's in there, to restrain the head better than some of our old versions do. Some of the old squeeze chutes, yeah, you caught them, but they could swing their head up and down and side to side, and there was a reasonably good chance you might get injured, especially this fine cow with the horns like that flying around. I don't know that I want to get too close to her head without being restrained like it is. not as young and nimble and quick as I used to be. So, and then we've got another example here. This is just a different version of the way that the head catch would work. This when this lever is pulled out to the side, this bottom part will come up and this top bar will come down and catch the head. So it's mobilized better to be able to do whatever we need. I think our next picture actually shows what that looks like where the head's caught. And then he can reach in, this guy can reach in there and it looks like he's putting an ear tag in the cow. So there's some different examples of some of these systems and all the behind the scenes part that are also very important. A lot of farmers love to talk about the squeeze chute, but we got to remember there's a bunch of other parts behind that that all make it work good. So with that, we're happy to entertain questions, try to answer those as best we can.